Oh, what a glorious day it was to be Galactic Officer Klaxon Vorthak. The pompous Centaurian security chief strutted through the corridors of Diplomatic Station Nexus 7, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the artificial lights. 6 feet of pure, unadulterated arrogance wrapped in what looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a tax collector. His forearms swayed with each step, and his compound eyes surveyed his domain with the satisfaction of someone who believed the universe owed him a personal apology for existing. You see, Klaxon had spent the better part of 3 decades climbing the bureaucratic ladder, stepping on anyone foolish enough to get in his way. Today he was expecting another routine diplomatic meeting. Boring humans, probably. They always were. The human delegation arrived precisely on schedule, because of course they did. Humans and their obsession with punctuality. Ambassador Elena Thompson led the group, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of smile that suggested she could negotiate your soul away before you realized you'd signed the contract. Behind her walked various trade officials, security personnel, and, oh, for the love of the cosmic void. A small human larva bounded alongside the group, 8 years old, according to the manifest. Mika Thompson, daughter of the ambassador. The little creature wore a bright yellow dress and carried some sort of spherical toy that defied gravity in the most obnoxious way possible. Klaxon's mandibles clicked in disgust. Children. The Centaurian species had evolved past such inefficient reproductive methods centuries ago. They produced fully formed adults from incubation pods. Thank you very much. None of this messy business with unformed pests running around, touching things, making noise, existing. The tour began in the main diplomatic hall. Klaxon droned through his prepared speech about station security protocols, occasionally pausing to let his translator catch up. The humans nodded politely, asked reasonable questions, and generally behaved like civilized beings. Then it happened. The Thompson larva Mika was playing with her gravity ball, tossing it up and catching it as it floated in lazy arcs. Harmless enough, really. But the sphere took an unexpected bounce off a ventilation grate, and the child giggled as she chased after it, straight into Klaxon's path. The impact was minimal. A soft bump against his lower leg. The kind of accidental contact that any reasonable being might excuse with a simple "watch where you're going, little one." But Klaxon was not any reasonable being. He was a Centaurian, and physical contact was absolutely, positively, categorically forbidden in his culture. His compound eyes fixed on the small human who had dared to touch his sacred person. "You disgusting little vermin." Klaxon's voice rose to a shriek that could shatter crystal. His upper right arm drew back, and with all the force his bureaucratic rage could muster, he struck the child across the face. Now, Klaxon weighed roughly 200 pounds and possessed the natural strength of a species that had evolved to crack open seed pods with their bare hands. Mika weighed maybe 60 pounds soaking wet. The physics were not in her favor. The little girl went flying, actually flying across the corridor like a rag doll, her small body slamming into the metal bulkhead with a sickening thud. She crumpled to the floor, blood trickling from her nose, her bright yellow dress now stained red. The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded supernovas. Ambassador Thompson's face went through several interesting color changes. White with shock, red with fury, then a pale, deadly calm that should have sent every survival instinct in Klaxon's brain screaming danger signals. Her security detail moved instinctively toward their weapons before she held up one hand to stop them. "Officer Vorthak," she said, her voice so controlled it could have cut diamonds. "You just struck my daughter." Klaxon puffed up his thorax with indignation. The creature made unauthorized physical contact with a galactic security officer. "I was merely disciplining inferior livestock according to standard protocols." He gestured dismissively at the groaning child. "Perhaps next time your spawn will learn proper respect for their betters." He pulled out his diplomatic immunity badge and waved it like a shield. "Furthermore, I am protected under Galactic Accord 7.3.2. You cannot touch me, human." Station Commander Flix Gornath, A spineless Kellyan politician who looked like someone had crossed a jellyfish with middle management finally arrived on scene. His translucent skin rippled with nervous energy as he assessed the situation. "Commander," Ambassador Thompson's voice could have frozen helium. "I demand this officer's immediate arrest for assault on a minor." Gornet's eye stalk swiveled between the bleeding human child and Klaxon's smug expression. The political calculation was written across his gelatinous features. One diplomatic incident versus offending the notoriously vengeful Zentorian hierarchy. "I'm afraid that's impossible, Ambassador." Officer Vorthak was performing his duties within established parameters. The humans quietly gathered around little Mika, who was conscious but clearly injured. They helped her to her feet, speaking in soft, reassuring tones. No screaming, no threats, no dramatic declarations of war. They simply left. As the human delegation filed out with their wounded child, Klaxon straightened his security uniform and turned to his fellow officers. "Well, that was satisfying," he announced to the gathered aliens. "Sometimes these primitive species need to be reminded of their place in the galactic hierarchy." The other security officers nodded approvingly. What delicious entertainment. The mighty Zentorian had shown those arrogant humans exactly who ruled this station. Oh, if only they had known what was coming. 3 days passed, and Klaxon Vorthak was having the time of his miserable little life. The security break room had become his personal theater, and where he regaled anyone unfortunate enough to be within earshot with increasingly elaborate retellings of his heroic disciplinary action. Each version grew more dramatic than the last. By day 2, he claimed the human larva had been wielding a primitive kinetic weapon, the gravity ball, naturally and threatening galactic security. You should have seen the terror in their beady little eyes. Klaxon clicked his mandibles with satisfaction, gesturing wildly with all 4 arms. The moment I demonstrated proper Zentorian authority, they scattered like frightened prey animals. His audience of fellow officers nodded sagely. Officer Grixtal, a slug-like Malarian whose species communicated primarily through slime secretions, left a particularly approving trail of mucus on the table. The reptilian security chief, SSCC Ironscale, hissed his approval while polishing his ceremonial blade. "Typical human behavior," SSGex commented, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air for lies. "All bluster and empty threats. When faced with real power, they retreat to their pathetic little world to lick their wounds." The other species stationed on Nexus 7 were equally amused by the whole affair. The crystalline Vex Ani tinkled their approval in harmonic frequencies that roughly translated to "serves them right." The gaseous nebulons formed sarcastic cloud patterns that would have been hilarious if anyone could have read them. Even better, the official response from Earth had arrived that morning. A formal diplomatic complaint. Klaxon had read it aloud to the entire security staff, complete with theatrical voice inflections. "The Terran Federation hereby lodges a formal protest regarding the unprovoked assault upon a minor citizen," he had recited, pausing for dramatic effect. "They demand a full investigation and appropriate justice." The laughter had echoed through the station's corridors for hours. "Investigation," wheezed Commander Gornath, his gelatinous body rippling with mirth. "Justice. Oh, these humans and their quaint little concepts." By the end of the 3rd day, Klaxon received the news that made his week complete. High Command had not only dismissed Earth's complaint, but had actually promoted him for maintaining Zentorian cultural superiority in the face of primitive aggression. Senior Security Officer Klaxon Vorthak. It had such a nice ring to it. The betting pools started almost immediately. The Malarians were taking odds on whether humans would even return to finish their trade negotiations. Most species put their money on complete human withdrawal within a standard week. The reptilians, ever optimistic about conflict, bet that humans might send a strongly worded letter or 2 before giving up entirely. "Emotional weaklings" became the station's unofficial motto regarding humans. All feelings, no backbone. Of course, there were a few minor inconveniences during this period of celebration. The station's power grid developed some peculiar fluctuations. Nothing major, just enough to make the lights flicker occasionally. The communications array started experiencing random static bursts that cleared up before the technicians could isolate the source. Chief Engineer Blopthak, a competent if unimaginative Blorgan, ran full diagnostics twice. Aging infrastructure, he concluded with a dismissive wave of his tentacles. These old diplomatic stations weren't built to last forever. I've scheduled routine maintenance for next week. Nobody thought to question why all these random malfunctions seemed to affect security systems most frequently. On the fourth day, Klaxon was reviewing security reports in his newly upgraded office when something caught his compound eyes. Long-range sensors had detected several ship signatures on the outer edge of the system. Human design, according to the computer's database. He clicked his mandibles dismissively. "Probably merchant vessels taking the long route home," he muttered, making a note to have the sensor technician recalibrate the equipment. Cowardly humans, sneaking around the system boundaries instead of using proper shipping lanes. How wonderfully, tragically wrong he was. The hyperspace alarm screamed through Nexus 7 at exactly 0800 station time on the fifth day. Klaxon was in the middle of his morning preening ritual when the first proximity alerts began shrieking. Multiple contacts, dropping out of hyperspace like angry meteors. His compound eyes focused on the tactical display, and his mandibles went slack with confusion. What in the void's name? 12 ships. Not the sleek, diplomatic vessels humans typically used for trade missions. These were brutal, angular things that looked like they had been designed by someone who thought aesthetically pleasing was a dirty phrase. Gray hulls bristled with weapons arrays, sensor equipment, and what appeared to be boarding tubes. The largest vessel bore markings that made Klaxon's translator hiccup before finally spitting out TMC Retribution, Terran Marine Corps. "Oh," said Klaxon, in the tone of someone who had just realized they had been juggling live grenades. "Oh, that's not good." Station-wide communications crackled to life as Commander Gornath's panicked voice echoed through every speaker. "Attention, human vessels. This is a diplomatic station operating under galactic accords. You are in violation of." His speech was cut off mid-sentence by a transmission that could have frozen liquid nitrogen. "Nexus 7, this is Colonel Marcus Kane, Terran Marine Corps. We are not here for diplomacy. Stand down all defensive systems and prepare for immediate boarding. Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force. This is your only warning." The voice belonged to someone who had clearly run out of patience several systems ago and was operating on pure, distilled fury. Gornath's response was predictably spineless. "Colonel Kane, surely we can discuss this through proper diplomatic channels. I'm certain whatever grievance, being negative. Discussion time is over. Boarding commences in 60 seconds. And with that delightfully ominous announcement, 200 humans in full combat armor began forcing their way through every available docking port, airlock, and maintenance hatch on the station. If you have never seen a Terran Marine in full battle gear, consider yourself fortunate. They stand roughly 7 feet tall in their powered exoskeletons, moving with the predatory grace of apex predators who have evolved specifically to ruin someone's day. Their armor is matte black, designed to absorb sensor sweeps and intimidate the life out of anything with functioning eyes. Leading this parade of nightmares was Colonel Marcus Bulldog Kane himself, and even through his helmet's faceplate. You could see the kind of expression that suggested he had been personally inconvenienced and intended to share that inconvenience with everyone in the immediate vicinity. Beside him stalked Master Sergeant Lisa Reaper Valdez, whose nickname apparently came from her hobby of collecting the heads of anyone foolish enough to threaten human civilians. Her armor bore small tally marks that nobody wanted to count too carefully. The station's security forces took one look at this approaching tide of heavily armed death and made the wise decision to find somewhere else to be, preferably several systems away. Commander Gornath made one last attempt at diplomatic immunity. "Marines, I must protest this violation of galactic law. This station operates under." Colonel Kane walked past him without breaking stride, as if the gelatinous commander were a particularly boring piece of furniture. The universal translator caught his muttered comment. Should have thought of that before one of yours decided to play kickball with a human kid. The systematic hunt began immediately. Marines moved through the station with terrifying efficiency, sealing bulkheads, cutting power to non-essential systems, and establishing control points at every major intersection. They worked in perfect coordination, communicating through encrypted channels and hand signals that suggested years of practice in exactly this sort of operation. Other alien species tried every response they could think of. The Malarians attempted to surrender by secreting submission pheromones all over the floor. The Reptilians offered to switch sides and help hunt Centaurians. The crystalline Vexani tried to blend into the walls by mimicking the station's metallic surfaces. The Marines ignored them all with professional indifference. They had come for one target, and they intended to collect. Klaxon, meanwhile, had locked himself in the most secure quarters he could find, his private office, protected by 3 layers of security doors and what he had previously considered impenetrable encryption. He frantically contacted Zentorian High Command, his forearms working multiple communication arrays simultaneously. In High Command. This is Senior Security Officer Vorthak. The humans have gone completely insane. They've invaded a diplomatic station with military forces. You must send immediate assistance. The response was not encouraging, Officer Vorthak. You are to resolve this situation immediately. The Zentorian Empire cannot be seen as unable to protect its personnel. Resolve it? They have 200 Marines in full battle armor. What am I supposed to resolve with? That is your problem. High Command out. Klaxon stared at the dead communication line, his compound eyes reflecting the flashing emergency lights. Through his office's reinforced windows, he could see Marines moving through the corridors with thermal imaging devices and bioscanners, methodically checking every room, in every closet, every air vent large enough to hide a Zentorian. They were hunting him specifically. The realization hit him like a meteor to the thorax. Somehow, some way, these Deathworld savages had obtained his biosignature. They were tracking his specific genetic markers, following his scent trail through the station's recycled air. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The Marines were coming, and Klaxon was beginning to understand that perhaps, just perhaps, striking a human child had been a truly spectacular mistake. The hunt lasted exactly 47 minutes. Klaxon had made his way through maintenance shafts, emergency corridors, and service tunnels, using every trick he had learned in 3 decades of bureaucratic survival. He had even considered hiding in the waste reclamation system before his dignity overruled his desperation. Finally, with nowhere left to run, he found himself in the station's reactor core section. The massive fusion reactor hummed ominously behind layers of radiation shielding, and Klaxon allowed himself a moment of bitter satisfaction. Surely even these Deathworld barbarians would not risk a reactor breach just to capture one Zentorian officer. He was, once again, spectacularly wrong. The blast doors to the reactor section cycled open with a hydraulic hiss, and 6 Marines in full battle gear stepped through like they were entering a grocery store. Their weapons were lowered but ready, and their movements spoke of complete confidence in their ability to handle one panicked alien. Senior Security Officer Klaxon Vorthak, announced the lead Marine, her voice filtered through her helmet speakers. Master Sergeant Valdez, according to the name stenciled on her armor. You are under arrest for assault on a human minor. Klaxon backed toward the reactor controls, his forearms spreading wide in what he hoped looked like a threatening gesture. Stay back. I will overload the reactor. I will destroy this entire station if you take one step closer. The Marines exchanged glances that somehow managed to convey amusement even through their faceplates. Sir, Sergeant Valdez said to someone off to the side, the bug thinks he's going to blow up the reactor. Colonel Kane's voice crackled through the comm system with what could only be described as professional disappointment. Does he realize that we already disabled the reactor's overload systems 40 minutes ago? The same time we cut his access codes? Apparently not, sir. Klaxon frantically pressed buttons on the control panel, his compound eyes widening as he received nothing but error messages. This is impossible. I have senior security clearance. Corrected Sergeant Valdez, stepping forward with the casual confidence of someone who had done this exact thing many times before. Past tense. You lost security clearance the moment you decided to use a human child as a punching bag. The apprehension itself was almost anticlimactic. Klaxon lunged at the controls one last time, and Valdez simply grabbed his upper right arm, twisted it behind his exoskeleton with mechanical precision, and applied just enough pressure to make him scream. His other 3 arms flailed uselessly as restraint fields locked around his limbs. Diplomatic immunity. He shrieked as they dragged him away. I have diplomatic immunity under Galactic Accord 7.3.2. You cannot do this. The Marines' laughter echoed through their helmet speakers. Diplomatic immunity, Colonel Kane's voice followed them through the corridors, is revoked the moment you assault our civilians, especially our children. Funny how that works. The makeshift tribunal aboard the TMC Retribution was not what anyone would call a lengthy affair. The ship's briefing room had been converted into a courtroom with military efficiency. 3 human officers sat behind a metal table, their expressions suggesting they had already reached their verdict before the proceedings began. Klaxon was strapped into a restraint chair that had clearly been designed with violent prisoners in mind. Around the room, various alien observers had been permitted to witness the proceedings. Commander Gornath huddled in one corner, looking like he wished he could dissolve entirely. The defendant will state his name and position for the record, announced the presiding officer. This is a mockery. Klaxon's voice cracked with indignation. I demand to speak with Zentorian High Command. I demand proper legal representation. This entire proceeding is a violation of galactic law. The defendant appears to be confused about his current legal status, observed the second officer dryly. Let me clarify. As of 47 minutes ago, you became subject to Terran military justice. The Galactic Council's legal system no longer applies to you. The main screen flickered to life, showing a hospital room on Earth. Ambassador Elena Thompson sat propped up in bed, her arm in a cast but her eyes blazing with controlled fury. Beside her, little Mika lay sleeping, her face still bandaged but peaceful. This is the victim. Ambassador Thompson's voice carried clearly through the courtroom. My daughter, Mika Thompson, age 8. She suffered a concussion, fractured ribs, and internal bleeding when this individual struck her without provocation. The screen switched to security footage from the station, showing the incident in perfect, damning detail. Klaxon watched himself strike the child, watched her small body flying through the air, watched himself dismiss her injuries as discipline for inferior livestock. I was maintaining order, he protested. The creature violated Zentorian cultural norms. Mika stirred on the screen, her eyes opening slowly. Mommy, is that the mean bug man who hurt me? Did he learn his lesson about hitting kids? The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded executions. The tribunal finds the defendant guilty of assault on a human minor, announced the presiding officer. Under Terran military law, assault on a child carries a mandatory sentence of death, to be carried out immediately. Wait. Commander Gornath finally found his voice. You cannot simply execute a diplomatic official. This is barbaric justice. The Galactic Council will never accept. Colonel Kane turned to face the gelatinous commander with an expression that could have melted hull plating. The Galactic Council had its chance to provide justice. They chose to protect a child abuser instead, so now they get to watch what human justice looks like. The execution was carried out with the same military efficiency that had characterized the entire operation. Quick, clean, and absolutely final. As the medical officer confirmed Klaxon's death, Colonel Kane turned to the alien observers. The deceased's remains will be prepared for diplomatic delivery to the Galactic Council. Consider it our formal response to your previous decision regarding the safety of human children. Klaxon Vorthak's final contribution to galactic relations was about to become a very memorable diplomatic package. The Galactic Council homeworld of Harmony Prime had hosted many dramatic moments in its 1,000-year history, but nothing quite like what was about to unfold in its grand assembly chambers. 47 species were represented in the massive circular hall, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, hisses, musical tones, and bioluminescent displays. At the center sat Council Speaker Thorvek Mindweaver, an ancient being whose psychic tendrils had guided galactic diplomacy for 3 centuries. The human delegation was announced with considerably less fanfare than usual. Representatives of the Terran Federation, called the Ceremonial Herald, his voice echoing through translation matrices in dozens of languages. Colonel Kane strode into the chamber, still wearing his military dress uniform, flanked by 2 Marines carrying an ornate wooden box between them. The container was beautiful, actually polished mahogany with brass fittings and an elegant silk ribbon. It looked like the sort of thing you might present to honored guests. The council speaker's tendrils waved in what most species recognized as polite curiosity. Colonel Kane, this is highly irregular. The council was not expecting a Terran military delegation today. My apologies for the lack of advance notice, Kane replied, his voice carrying the sort of politeness that suggested imminent violence. We have a diplomatic delivery that simply could not wait for proper scheduling. He gestured to his Marines, who placed the elegant box on the chamber's central podium with ceremonial care. From the people of Earth, Kane announced, a gift to commemorate the recent resolution of a diplomatic incident involving the assault of a human child. Thorvek's psychic abilities were picking up something deeply unsettling from the human delegation, but curiosity overrode caution. The ceremonial opening of diplomatic gifts was a time-honored tradition after all. The box opened with a soft click. What followed was the most spectacular display of interspecies panic in recorded galactic history. Floating in perfectly clear preservation fluid was the severed head of Senior Security Officer Klaxon Vorthak, his compound eyes frozen in an expression of terminal surprise. Attached to the inside of the lid was a small card written in elegant script, return policy, no exchanges, no refunds, touch our kids again and find out. The Malarians immediately began secreting terror pheromones in such quantities that the chamber's air recycling system overloaded. 3 reptilian delegates fainted on the spot. The crystalline Vexani shattered into harmonic frequencies that roughly translated to screaming. Ambassador Gixtak, the Zentorian representative, rose to his full 8-foot height, his exoskeleton clicking with rage. This is an outrage, a barbaric violation of every civilized principle. I demand the immediate expulsion of humanity from the galactic community. Colonel Kane turned to face the furious ambassador with an expression of polite interest. Ambassador Gixtak, your government had the opportunity to provide justice for the assault of an 8-year-old human child. You chose instead to promote the perpetrator and dismiss our formal complaint. His voice carried the sort of reasonable tone that made the threat underneath even more terrifying. So we provided our own justice. Consider this a practical demonstration of human problem-solving. Council Speaker Thorvek was frantically trying to restore order as delegates either fled the chamber or demanded immediate sanctions against Earth. Colonel Kane, this act of violence cannot stand. The Council will impose severe economic penalties. Will you? Kane's smile could have frozen solar systems. Let me save you some calculation time, Speaker Mindweaver. Humanity provides 47% of your medical supplies, 31% of your advanced manufacturing, and 68% of your agricultural surplus. We also happen to control the 3 most efficient shipping routes between the core worlds and the outer colonies. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Our terms are simple, Kane continued pleasantly. Accept that crimes against human citizens will be subject to human justice or find new trading partners. We'll give you standard time to decide. Thorvek's psychic tendrils writhed as he performed rapid political calculations. The humans had planned this perfectly. Economic leverage, dramatic timing, and a very clear demonstration of their willingness to act. The Council recognizes that the incident involving Officer Vortak has been resolved through proper channels, Thorvek announced reluctantly. Colonel Kane nodded approvingly. Excellent. The Terran Federation looks forward to continued peaceful relations with all species who understand the value we place on protecting our children. As the human delegation departed, leaving behind their diplomatic gift and a chamber full of traumatized aliens, one thing became crystal clear throughout the galaxy: human children were absolutely, positively, categorically off limits. 3 months later, little Mika Thompson had fully recovered and was back to chasing gravity balls through station corridors. The difference was that now every alien she encountered treated her with the sort of respectful caution usually reserved for unstable antimatter, which, considering her species' response to threats against their young, was probably appropriate.